Check, check, check.
All right, it works.
Works. Welcome, everyone. Incredibly nice to see so many faces. I hope you enjoyed this morning. I think it was very hands-on. We really enjoyed it. Thank you for putting the work in. You can all see it after the lecture. But first, I want to introduce Manuel Bouzas. He's an architect, an educator, and also a curator. He graduated from the Polytechnical School of Madrid and also Harvard School of Design. And it was actually quite early on our radar that we wanted to bring Manuel over to Delft. He's known for doing installations that he designs and builds and curates since quite early in his studies. We see those installations as great examples of how you can put circularity into practice, into real exhibitions and into follies within the urban context. Another part that really resonated with us as INDESEM is his curating work. We see it as a thoughtful, both artistic and technical curation of materials, techniques, and narratives. This year, Manuel was the curator of Internalities, which is the Spanish pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale of 2025, which we would like to congratulate him with. We are incredibly excited for this talk. Thank you all for joining in so many numbers. And welcome to INDESEM. Manuel, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Do you hear me well? Yeah, it's working? All right. Sorry for the delay. We have some technical issues. It's a huge pleasure to be here, finally, in these iconic orange steps, that I've been, seeing as a student in internet so many years ago. And thank you to the team of INDESEM. They're doing a great job in creating, organizing these, these events, and thank you for the invitation. It's a huge honor to be with you guys. So, the lecture for today is called Architectures for Territorial Equilibrium. This is, like a big statement, but in a way is what is pushing my work forward, right? It's sort of the question I am trying to answer from my practice, from my curation, education, etc. Is how can we, balance one thing with the other? And it's also the subtitle of the Spanish pavilion in Venice, that if you had the chance of being there, or if you're going to travel that summer, you will see that the word is internalities, but the subtitle is that one. This is, in a way, the idea. The lecture for today is divided in two parts. One is more theory-based or more reflection. So we are going to think a little bit about how to move away from an obsolete construction industry, right? So it's not going to be about obsolete buildings or renovation of buildings, but about to really rethink a construction industry that is becoming obsolete. And then I'm going to walk you through some experiments that I have done in terms of temporary installation as a practitioner. And I think this is good for you guys because I am very close to your position right now, right? I was a student like a few years ago, and more or less we are in the same age. So I'm going to show you how, at least how was my experience in trying to establish, my own practice and how to find my way about, designing and building things. So let's start with one question. Do you remember what you were doing in the March 23 of 2021? It was 4 years ago. You would probably not remember because it's a normal day, but something strange and fascinating happened in the world, which is this thing. It was a cargo boat that was coming to here, to Rotterdam. It came from Asia. It's called the Ever Given boat and was transporting 20,000 containers, right? This is the Canal de Suez that passes through Egypt. And that day in Egypt, there was a wind pointing to the north that was 90 kilometers of speed. That's a lot. And from that canal, the 10% of the flows of every single cargo boat passes through that place, right? So that day, because of the wind, that boat rotated, pivoted, and blocked the canal. And blocked the canal for 6 days. And every day the boat was there, $10 billion of the global economy was paralyzed. 6 days. And what I think this is important, because in a way, this shows to what extent we are vulnerable and exposed to a planetary condition of the market. I love this map that is made by a professor I had at Harvard, which is Neil Brenner. Right now he's teaching at Chicago. And he draws a map, right? It's very different from the typical map that we see of the world because the ocean is connected, right? This is his thesis, Planetary Urbanization, where basically the argument is that today you cannot say where your city begins or where your city concludes because more or less everything is the same thing, right? Every single territory in the world, urban or not urban, in a way serves this purpose, which is production processes that are connected and linked through this incredibly complex web of flows of resources, energy, data, and people. And this is the situation where we live. And Neil Brenner draws another drawing that I like a lot, which is the globe, right? And this is not just talking about the human footprint, right, of what we do and our commerce, our market, our economy, but about the impact of the humans in the universe. And all these dots that you can see there are not only satellites, but the waste produced in all the spatial operations by the companies like NASA, et cetera, et cetera. So this is our human footprint as humans, beyond the sphere of the globe. It's quite crazy if you think about that, right? So all this waste, spatial waste, is not intentional. They are externalities. Externalities that is indirect consequences, negative consequences that happens when you want to achieve something. When you want to do a production process, and in the middle of the way, you generate things that you don't want to generate. This is our externalities, far beyond the globe of the Earth. And this word of externalities is something that obsessed me. There was this guy who was Arthur Pigou. Arthur Pigou was an economist that in the 1920s, he founded the economic department of the University of Oxford. And he defined an externality as the indirect cost that affect people and territories with no direct involvement in the production of a given good. And he used to put an example of his time, right? For example, imagine that we want to move stuff from one place, from the factory to the city. And we move it in a train. And that train uses a railway. And that railway passes through a forest. Well, imagine that train at some point generates a spark that generates a wildfire. This is an externality, something with a negative consequence that is not accounted in the production process. But today, externalities characterize in a way the construction industry, an obsolete construction industry. For example, you probably know this. This is an aluminum frame. In all Europe, we have a lot of aluminum good window frames. But what you don't probably know is that for every kilogram of aluminum that we generate, we're producing 2 kilograms of toxic waste. This is another externality. And this is something that is very close to me. I come from Galicia, north Spain. This is the factory, the biggest factory of aluminum of the region. It's called Alcoa, that right now is decommissioned. And you can see how the size of Alcoa is as big as the size of the externalities this factory generates. This is a red pond with all the toxic waste, 2 times the weight of the aluminum, that is there. And nobody is going to remove it from there because it's super toxic. This is the externalities that we produce in a construction industry. I love this drawing by Charlotte Maltbarts, a Swiss architect, that in a way say, at what moment, in which moment, we arrive to such a complex construction industry, right? For designing a house, you have to rely on such a big amount of materials, a lot of layers, super complex, super technical, for the thermal barriers, for the waterproofing, for the insulation, et cetera, that makes this industry extremely complicated, right? So if this happens with aluminum, imagine what happens with any other single material involved here. Steel, concrete, glass, plastic, et cetera. This is a production process that is extremely opaque, extremely black-boxed, and super difficult to trace back and to analyze. And this is the context where we have to intervene. So in a way, in my obsession with externalities, me and my colleague Roy Salgueiro, in the curation of the Spanish pavilion, we tried to analyze how many externalities define the construction industry. And for us, there are 5. There are the externalities produced when we extract materials in a violent way, when we burn energy that is imported from elsewhere. This is the most pollutant factory in Spain, which is in Galicia again. The labor, when we displace this labor to the other side of the world, those people, that build our materials where we build with, or craft the clothes that we wear, or even the residues that we generate through the demolition of the processor, or finally, the emissions, which is the last consequence of all these impacts, right? And that make us to live in a moment, historical moment, of climate crisis that explains where we are here today. And this is the future, right? By 2050, we'll be generating between 44 and 53 billion tons of CO2 emissions, and at the same time, we will be 10 billion people in the planet. And if you cross paths, you will see that that triangle is an area of opportunity. We need to build more, right? There is a pressing necessity of building more housing in the cities, and we have to do it in a way that we should curve this emissions curve back again. So it's not only talk about net zero emissions, it's about how to talk about positive impacts in the environment. How can we create buildings that serve as carbon depots, and in which way we can absorb more emissions than we release. So in a way, there's an opportunity here to understand a planetary urbanization like this, extremely complex, extremely hyper-connected, and the way of doing it is to looking to what we have available locally, immediately. So if we erase or if we turn off that layer of connections, we will see that every single country in the world have their own resources, their own material palette, their own intelligences. And it's a responsibility, and it should be in our agenda to mobilize that. So in a way, we should talk about the contrary to the externalities, which is what we define internalities. So instead of extracting materials violently from elsewhere, we should think about harvesting them. And this connects in a way with the timber industry that spans 30 years long, but can provide a regenerative material that can substitute concrete or energy. Instead of burning it, generating emissions, we capture it with wind, water, and sun. And this is what is happening today in Spain, with a major energy hub, or labor. Instead of displacing it to the other side of the world, what if we support them? All these people that work with, earth, ceramic, clay, like you have been doing today here. Or the residues. What if we start to think not about recycling, but upcycling, bringing more value to what is considered waste? Or finally, the emissions. What if, by working with what we have available, we can actually reduce emissions in certain place? And this is what internalities is about. It's a word that does not exist. You will not find it in the dictionaries, but we propose that should be interesting to consider it in our vocabulary. And we define it this way. An internality is this boundary system where the arrows, instead of going outside the ecosystem, are going inside. So an internality is the result of mitigating the environmental externalities associated with production processes by using local materials, regenerative materials, and low-impact materials in harmony or in balance with the territories they come from. And this is, in a way, the goal. So I'm going to present today 5 projects that are addressing that question, right? This one is internalities, which is the Spanish pavilion at the Venice Biennale that we opened 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we were there with all the participants, 50 participants, architects, photographers, researchers from the north, east, west, south of Spain, and we were celebrating the culmination of 8 months of work trying to define that word. This is a work curated by me, of course, but my colleague Roy Salgueiro, and I want to thank him for the hard work all these months. And where basically we wanted to address or to represent how Spain is doing things differently. So we, in a way, collected evidence to demonstrate that this word makes sense. And we selected 16 projects made by architects from Catalonia, Basque Country, Madrid, Balearic Islands, Galicia, Andalusia, etc., that support our thesis. This is our evidence. This couldn't be made 5 or 10 years ago because this evidence didn't exist. And here you can see buildings made with wood, with timber, with stone, with earth, even with recycled materials. For social housing, for landscape architecture projects, for renovation of chapels, for public buildings, etc., etc. And we asked them two things, two models. One of them, they knew how to do it, the other one not. So the first model was about the space we construct. And we asked them to create a constructive model of their tectonics. So we have models of 1:25 to 1:20 that talk about how they build with that timber, with that earth, with that stone, etc. And they knew how to do it. That's easy. But we asked them about the other, about the model of the landscape where this material comes from. And they were like, well, I don't know. I more or less know where it comes from, but I don't really, I'm an expert of this. So we asked them, try to be an expert, try to do a model that represents, in a way, the ecology that takes place in that territory. So they created, after a lot of research, the models of the quarries, the model of the forests, the model of the soils where these buildings come from. And it was an incredible experience. Because we have projects like this made with mass timber, like Bosque Cap de Ferro, social housing, and they have the model of the tectonics of the mass timber, but also the models of the forest where this timber comes from in the Basque Country. Natura Futura and Bamba Studio created this cultural hub in Ecuador. They are Spanish architects operating in South America. And they're working with raw logs. And they represented both that tectonic as the forest, extremely close to the building, of wetlands, where these trees are cut. People that work with earth. This social housing project is made with compressed earth blocks, called Pet de Terra. And the architects represented not only the units that define this spatial, like housing thing, but also the river that delivers that clay, that earth, that allows a new industry to be possible. Earth that sometimes comes from the very, very place where the building is located. And this house is made with another type of rammed earth construction, where the earth is directly excavated from the plot. And they actually represent both things. Or a stone. It's not only about architecture. There are people working at the scale of urban design, right? And these architects, Branco del Rio, created a carpet, a plaza, that connects the different villages in this town in Portugal. And they represent carefully that village, but also the quarry where they, sculpted all these pieces. Or this chapel, that is about completing a ruin that was there in the north of Spain, in Zaragoza. And and these stone blocks that are cut digitally with robots, etc., they got the saw that cut the blocks, and they brought it to Venice. That's all. And this is where the model is located. And the quarry, they had no idea about how to represent that quarry. So they went to the masons, and they asked them, can you actually sculpt it? They have the quarry in the back of their heads. They know their landscape, so they actually sculpted it. And they gave it to us to bring it to Venice. Or this one, that is about recycling. This is a heterogeneous construction made with cardboard, steel, wood, made by Isla in Switzerland, Spanish architects operating outside. They represented it with the territory it comes from. So in the Alps, in Switzerland, they put every single material from the exact place where they sourced it, from all those depots that are in the metropolitan area of Basel. And with that red dot, that like Google Maps says, hey, the project is located here. And how to present both models, right? So this is where we came up with this idea of the balance, the Egyptian balance, that for many millennia, right, was a symbol of balance, equilibrium, but also of justice. And this was the message we wanted to deliver in Venice, environmental justice. So we designed our own scales, made with timber, right, that present two plates for the two models. We built these 16 scales, extremely big. They were like that, right? They were very intimidating. And they presented both models, delivering a message, which is as important is the space we construct as the space we deconstruct. And we, the architects, and all the building industry, should put the same care and the same attention in both things. Models that were located there on their plates, and people could actually look at them 360, right, from every single angle. And we try to work in the same fashion, right? If we are asking them to work this way, we should do it in the same way. And all the wood, all the timber that we use it for those scales, sourced for a very special place for me, which is the common lands. Common lands that are Galician forests that occupy like 20% of the territory, and they are managed by people like this, rural communities that take care of their forests. And we asked them, can you give us 3 trees for the whole exhibition? And they were like, of course, they will be an honor. So we asked them to give to us those trees, and we documented every single step, from the cutting of the tree to the manufacturing in the factory, to the carpentry moment, right, where these scales were assembled. So we perfectly knew what trees we used for the exhibition and who was the people behind it. But the exhibition was not only about that. We had 5 other rooms surrounding the middle, the central room with the scales. And we deliver some research projects, right? It's quite cool to understand an exhibition, a Venice Biennale, as a platform where to deliver some research, to create some knowledge that didn't exist before. So we selected 5 teams to present a research project connected to a specific region of Spain, Balearic Islands, Basque Country, Madrid, etc., working with only one material. Tell us about those landscapes. Tell us about those processes. So the first team looked at the timber industry in the Basque Country that is fueling or prompting a new paradigm in construction in Spain, right? Mainly, most of the timber buildings that you will see in Spain comes from here, from the Basque Country. And they presented these totems that investigate some of the advances in the future of this industry. And they presented a visual essay documenting all the steps necessary to do that. And it initiates 30 years ago, when you plant these trees, these pine trees, how you cut them, how you create these CLT panels that in a way culminates in all the buildings that I showed you. The second room was about the second axis of internalities, the energy. And these architects, Star and Luis Diaz, created a model of a river. Have you ever seen a model of a river? Well, it's like this. It's not just a line, it's a lot of lines, a lot of complex lines. But their main argument is that this river in Galicia is not just a natural ecosystem, it's an energy ecosystem. An energy ecosystem that 50 years ago looked like this. This is that coal factory that I showed you in the beginning. This was the most pollutant factory in Spain that today is decommissioned. And if you go to the origins of that river, you will see that something is going on. Okay. So this is where the river starts, and you will see that wind farm in the top of the hill that talks about this energy ecosystem. If you go downstream, you will see these hydroelectric dams that generate a lot of power, more than the power that they consume. And finally, we go to the third room, which is called labor. And in labor, we wanted to investigate how the earth construction in Catalonia has to do with a lot of intelligences and knowledge that are attached to the hands of the people. People that advocate for being local, for using their hands to build the buildings. It's not prefabricated, it's not exported, it's very, very internal. So they, in this compressed earth blocks table, they presented all the tools that these people use. And they created a visual essay with images of those hands. Hands that separate the grains, the necessary grains for making this possible, hands that get dirty when it comes about creating those bricks, or hands that can be creative as well. And this is the ceramic tiles that are created in Catalonia that will be placed in the Sagrada Familia very soon. The fourth room was about residues, and this was placed in Madrid. Lucas Muñoz, who is not an architect, is an industrial designer, said one very interesting thing, and is, what if Madrid, that does not produce any resource, what if we talk about recycling all the waste that we produce? So they created this portal, this ornamental, postmodernist, very funky portal, and they made this big statement, which is, this is ornament and detritus, like the Adolf Loos essay, right? And they presented all the detritus that they collected from the streets of Madrid. Madrid, where speculation is taking place, right? It's very frequent to see these containers full of waste, and they were every day, selecting some materials to build that ornamental door, right? And they visited all those places that has to do with our recycling industry, right? That are very dirty, but are necessary to be analyzed, right? How we transform all those things to make it possible. The last room, and I conclude the Imaginaries project here, is about emissions, and it's focused on the Balearic Islands. Imagine if this is difficult to do in a European context, imagine in an island. So these guys, for the last 10 years, you probably know them, it's called the IBABI. They have a El Croquis magazine. So they've been looking to what they have in the last 10 years, and they discover amazing amount of materials there. They have stone, they have earth, they have timber, etc. And they have to work in favor of those materials, not against. So this delivered them to the point where they are working with arcs and bolts and an architecture that speaks about solidity and weight and gravity. Why? Because this can protect them from the Mediterranean environment, reducing to the 50% the emissions they generate in their housing projects. So we visited all these quarries. They presented all these Mare sandstone quarries that are extracted in the territory, the type of architecture that they create, right? Extremely beautiful to live here. Don't forget, this is social housing, right, with the bolts. And they just brought one of those bolts to Venice. They are going one step forward, right? And sometimes that stone is not about where you source it, but how can you recycle it? And they are actually, architects, are experimenting on how to upcycle the stone of the demolition by casting it into cyclopean concrete, delivering these beautiful terrazzo blocks that can be used as a load-bearing element. This is what the Balearic Islands is doing, looking at what they have inside. And these deliver a great collection of social housing projects made with earth, made with wood, made with stone, for the most vulnerable segment of the population in the Balearic Islands, reducing by 50% the emissions they generate. I conclude here is INDESEM published the pavilion 2 weeks ago, and they, in the header, they said something that I really liked a lot, which is the Spanish pavilion demonstrate, not only speculates, that another way of building is possible. And it was an immense pride and an immense pleasure to represent the country by doing something like that. All right, how are we going so far? Good, are you tired, guys? Yeah, good. Okay, let's talk about practice now, and how all this theory, these ideas can be implemented in reality. And sometimes I feel like this way, right? I love this meme, right? Like, how can this theory, it seems very complex. But it's possible, okay? Let's be optimistic. How can we implement that in every single project we do? And again, like this is how I feel most of the time. But yeah, my practice or what I've been doing so far has to do with this, with material ecologies, embodied carbon, how to reduce it, and design for disassembly, because many of these projects are temporary. But at the same time, I think it's important to consider other things. And in my work, you will see that it's important to reactivate public space, to experiment with new structures, and to design through making. And I've been involved with my hands in many of them. Actually, this is the place where I used to work, this workshop, before I moved to the US. And it's quite cool to fabricate with your own hands all these things. This is where I developed my passion for wood and timber. And we started by doing projects, very small projects, with very little resources when I was a student, working with my friend, Santiago, here in that workshop with our own hands. And we crafted this lamp that was installed in the courtyard of a monastery in Catalonia. Or working with recycled elements sometimes, right? Like these red plastic cups that we gather, right, in Mallorca, and we created these 3 catenaries that fill the space of another palace in Mallorca. Or furniture, we designed furniture made with wood, again, for a palace, in this case in Rome, in the Villa Medici. Furniture that can be used in many, many ways. Or even exhibitions that has to do with timber and forest, which is something I'm very passionate about, and that we presented at Harvard. But I'm going to focus on 3 projects I've been doing in the last years, extremely quick, that in a way embodies all these questions that I want to address. So the first one is the Mediterranean Pavilion that was built 2 years ago in Valencia. It was built in this square, an obsolete space, an obsolete public space. It was the result of a demolition, and there was absolutely nothing there. There was no shadow, no benches, no vegetation, no water, nothing. And the question that the festival prompted was an open call, a public competition, and they asked to every single young architect in Spain, what can we do here to transform this space into something that is life again? So I started to become obsessed with what they already have. And they have, in the Valencia, these beautiful Mediterranean shutters. That is what gives names to the project. Very characteristic of the Mediterranean basin. And it's not frequent to see them today, because right now we rely on fan coils and things like that. But this use you to protect you from the sun while allow you cross ventilation. And we become obsessed with this material because actually it's produced there. In Valencia, they produce the 90% of the shutters that get exported to all the Mediterranean basin. So the question was, how can we upscale this idea, right, and make the biggest Mediterranean shutter ever? A shutter that can, in a way, cover a whole plaza, moving from the window, the scale of the window, to the scale of the plaza. And we represented it with that model, a model that speaks how ideas can be upscaled from the window to the facade to the plaza. And again was this idea of the catenary, a structure very lightweight that hangs from two wooden porticos and in a way cast this immense shadow on the plaza, 300 square meters, where people can actually develop other type of activities and come together as a community. We sourced all the materials, the shutters, the stone, and the timber, for just 300 kilometers away from the place. And I actually put a lot of emphasis in trying to be scientific with this. And where everything was designed for being disassembled. Only in 2 weeks, we constructed this pavilion, only using timber and all these steel connectors. Some moments like this one, right? The stone, floating there. And this is the result. A big canopy that covers the entire plaza with these rocks that balance structurally the weight of the catenary, and where people, can gather as a community. They can sit there, they can enjoy a good climate, because actually it's extremely warm in Valencia in the summer, that in a way construct that facade in the street, right, at the level of the adjacent buildings, and where people can just freely occupy this space and make it their own, right? They were doing, talks and conversations and, parties, even a band. And I love this picture because the band is wearing the green caps in honor to the green color of the project, right? But there was one problem here, and is that I did my calculations, my carbon calculations, and I realized one thing, which is all the CO2 emissions that we absorb by using timber were offset by all the emissions released by the steel connectors, which are these dark gray things. These little things release as much emissions as we absorb with timber. So in the next project, I wanted to do it again, but in the good way, right? So the next project was Cabansetel, and it's in Rome, in Villa Medici, the Academy of France in Rome. It's the most beautiful place I've ever been, probably. This was another gift of life. And they asked us, because it was another festival, to do an installation in one of these gardens. There are 16, and they were designed by Ferdinando di Medici 500 years ago. In these gardens, they used to cultivate all the food, all the necessary products that they need for the life in the palace. And when you look at the maps, you can see these 16 square gardens. But the thing is that when you go there, you never see that. You never see the ecologies of the palace. They are neglected because the bushes that surround the gardens are super tall. So when I was there, I say, oh, what a pity. It would be incredible actually to look at this from above and understand how the ecologies of the academy operates. So we created an observatory with the same structure of the other pavilion. An observatory that mediates in between the city. You are in one of the highest places of the city of Rome, so you can see the whole city. But at the same time, you can see these gardens from above for the first time in history. So we did, again, the same structure, but without steel connectors, only joining timber with timber. It was more challenging in terms of structure, but we got it. And this diagonal staircase brought people up to this observatory. We made everything in 5 days, half of the time of the previous project, by just working with timber. And this is the result, an observatory placed in one of those gardens, looking at both conditions at the same time. observatory that has this butterfly wing-shaped canopy that casted shadow during the summer, and where people, had to find their way into the project because it was hidden in the forest, right? With these tectonics that resembles the previous project, right? And that staircase that leads you up, where you can see the city of Rome. This is drawing of tectonics, which is something I love, and you will see that in every single project I do. And here's the view, right? The gardens for the first time from above. Again, this is a place for the community, for the people that live there, and it will serve as a stage for the whole summer, where people were doing performances and songs and concerts, etc., right? Every single building has an impact, an urban impact of where it's located. I'm going to present the last project, which is about to open next week, so quite confidential. But I'm very happy to present it here for the first time, which is called Atlas. And this is in Portugal, another festival about to open. And this is the city of Braga in the north of Portugal. And they are working in the outskirts of Braga, where all these massive neighborhoods were erected in the 70s. Super tall, super tough. There is no much life there. And they wanted to revitalize the hinterland of the city by doing some actuations, some installations there. So they invited 7 Portuguese architects and me to propose something, right? And I got obsessed with this ring that is there in the middle of the plaza. In the middle of this circular plaza, there is a ring, this one, that is absolutely forgotten or obsolete. Call it whatever you like. Nobody uses it. It's old-fashioned. It's dirty. It's destroyed, and it hasn't a roof. So the question here is, what can we do here? And I got fascinated by this sculpture that is called Atlas. The person holding the weight of the world, and it's a fountain. And this is what gives the name to that neighborhood. It's the neighborhood of the fountains, and this is because of that sculpture. So I wanted to do a provocation, right? If this person is, holding the weight of the world, what if the ring was holding something else? A canopy that could create something special in this ring. So the idea was to create a vault, right, that is transformed this into a cultural space where people will, gather together again, trying to reactivate their community. And I did it by looking at one structural system that I love, which is the Sullinger lamella system, invented 100 years ago by a German engineer that was very popular in South America, where I discovered it. And the beautiful thing of this is that everybody can do that. You can do big structures by only using regular pieces of timber, plain timber. And actually, if you look at this diagram, by using this system, you can save 50% of the regular timber that you use for a roof. Super intelligent. Why are not we using this more often? So I wanted to understand how it's built. And we created this bolt that is floating over the ring with the lamella system and actually spans beyond the footprint of the ring. And it's built in 2 ways. On the hand, this timber structure. On the other hand, the metal substructure. The wooden structure has these plywood panels that will provide the shade for the roof. And they are cut from 2 CLT panels from Galicia, from those common forests that I told you about in the beginning. And the metal, and they are joined in a very complex way where every single cut has to be digitally fabricated. The metal part has been made reusing all the waste that the contractor had in its own factory. So this metal substructure is hybrid. It's a Frankenstein made of different profiles because we wanted to use what is available there. And this is how it looks like. In 1 week, it's going to be real. This vault, protecting, sheltering that Atlas monument. And it's a space, where people will do a lot of things there, from parties to summer cinemas to popular lunches, etc. I love this idea of the arc and the fountain. And it's running over the ring, being supported by this V-shaped structure in the middle of the pond. It's already in construction, and it's quite fun to see how it's evolving, right? Because you're using, piece by piece, and it's growing and growing. Every day I go there, the structure is bigger. And this is more or less the point where we are at right now. All right, I conclude. Beyond practice, I'm also an educator. I teach at Cornell in the United States. This university, designed by a Dutch architect, Rem Koolhaas, and where I try to share this agenda with the people there, with the students involved. And all of them have been participated in the projects, right? I try to work with them. And they have been, very critical, performing very critical roles in terms of design, production, etc. Both in this project, as in the Spanish pavilion, etc. Right? I trust on this idea of learning through making with them, and actually I want to teach some of these things, right? And I have this seminar called Internalities, like the Spanish pavilion, when I ask the students that come from different places of the world, India, China, South Korea, etc., to apply the same methodology in their own regions. I invited many of these lecturers to talk at Cornell, and I asked them the same exercise. They were mapping their own territories in Korea, in India, in China, understanding the flows of the resources, right? Who is involved with, what type of industries are involved, developing their own tectonics, right? Very uncommon, very original, because they are working with what is available, and arriving to different typologies, right? This is the same house, but made with different regional resources, right? From India, from Turkey, etc., right? And this is sort of the attitude I want to share with them. I finish with 3 ideas or conclusions. One is that to move away from an obsolete industry requires us to consider the full life cycle of buildings before construction begins and long after the construction ends. This is what an obsolete construction industry looks like. We extract things, we manufacture, we transport, we construct, and we demolish. And this is where we have been educated for many years in designing an object. But what happens if we think on what happened before? Much before the design starts. And what happens if we start to think on what happened after? The second idea is that moving away from an obsolete industry requires us to mobilize the resources and intelligences embedded in a given place, in a given territory. And one of the things that we presented in the Spanish pavilion is, for the first time, a map of Spain with no political boundaries, we delete them, no road network, we delete them. We just presented all the resources that are available there. All those landscapes, all those forests, all those quarries, all those soils that are necessary for the decarbonization of a country. And this is a map that we gave to every single architect in Spain to start the project with that, by looking on what do they have around. And this is something that could be exported and expanded through every single country in the world. And the last idea, and I finish here, is that moving away from an obsolete industry offers an opportunity, an incredible opportunity to try to downscale this planetary urbanization, right? And to balance the economies of construction with ecologies of production. And this is the video that we presented in the Spanish pavilion.
Nature produce no waste. No externalities. Every material flow is internalized in a continuous cycle. What if architecture followed the same logic? If the materials we build with were harvested, not extracted? If the energy we consume was captured, not burned? If the labor we depend on was supported, not displaced? If the residues we generate were upcycled, not discarded? And the emissions we produce were prevented, not just released? Every time we construct a space, we deconstruct another. Often, in remote geographies across the planet, new times demand new design responses. What if architecture were constructed in partnership with the land? What if we internalized our environmental externalities? We invite you to think with us How can we balance the economies of construction with the ecologies of production?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mano. We have time for questions, and I can imagine there are many. Is there someone who wants to start? Because we have the time today, more than yesterday.
There is a question over there.
I have a question about the lookout thing you made in Rome. You told us that you wanted to use as less metal or things in that design, but I saw at the end that you used some metal gates. So why did you choose that option?
Some metal, what?
Some metal gates surrounding, or fences surrounding the lookout post.
The fences. Oh,
Yeah.
the handrails.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Well, the handrails, yeah, they are made with steel, and this is because we relied on a standard product, right? That for a temporary lifespan of months, you can actually reuse them again, right? So sometimes it's not only about the emissions that you generate in your building, it's about how can we think about the life cycle after, right? And if you use something as standard, it's very possible that someone can use it later, and this is actually the case.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again for the lecture. Super cool. I think actually the first project I discovered by you was the also the Caban 7L, the lookout. It seemed to be everywhere at one point in the last 6 months, which is great. And but it was super interesting as well in relation to the metal connections, how you went from metal plates and external metal plates with the bolts and then just the bolts. How did you kind of conduct that research to really transition and make sure it was still okay? And then, you know, there's a lot of shear force. I know this is more technical, but it's tricky. I mean, there's some structures that I've seen that are just kind of bolts with more wooden connections, but yeah, what was because it's also, it seemed like a slightly bigger structure in a way, the lookout. So
Yeah. Well, I forgot to say that, but I always work with one structural engineers. I love to work with engineers, especially the structural ones. And this person has been working with me from the very beginning, from the Valencia project to the Portuguese project, right? And in the first iteration of the structure in Valencia, he, in a way, wanted to use these steel connectors because the gravity there behaved in a different way, right? The force was not the vertical one, but the horizontal one because of the tension of the catenary. So this introduced different forces that only with the steel brackets could be solved, right? And we didn't have much time, so we didn't spend much time thinking on that. Honestly, I didn't thought that was a big deal until I made the calculations later, and I said, "Oh my God, that's a lot, right?" But in the Cabancetel, we could make things differently. First, because we didn't have this horizontal force, and two, because we spent a lot of time thinking on how to solve it in a different way, right? So every single connection is timber to timber. The timber is different, is thicker, etc. But actually, it was a lot of back and forth with the structural engineer trying to put your agenda right into their calculations. So it's a sort of negotiation. And actually, you will see that there is something else different, which is there is no stone there for the counterbalance of the structure. There are water bags. And under the Cabancetel, there are water bags, like 16 of them, that serve as counterweight. So actually, that water, you can use it later for, for the garden, and there is no trace of any single foundation, right? This is another change I forgot to explain.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question also. Also, thank you for the nice presentation. I have a question about the social impact. I was especially interested actually also in this social housing from the H architects, and also in combination with this map of Spain with the materials. And how do you think can we implement it more and more in the social housing? Because you often see maybe this sustainable projects with these fancy villas or special buildings, but less with houses like social housing. And is there a bigger movement in Spain compared to somewhere else? Or
Yeah, I think like there is something going on in Spain, right? Because almost every single practice, let's say popular practices, they have this agenda embedded on their heads, right? That's why we collected all this evidence, because it existed. I don't know if this would be possible in any other single country. And what is incredible is that this agenda comes from working in social housing mainly. Half of the projects that we exhibited were social housing. It's crazy, right? And it's a very challenging contest because, you know, money is not a lot, right? There is a lot of different interests, the institution, the government, blah, 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 and made it possible. And this is because in the Balearic Islands, 10 years ago, there was an administration that started to do things differently. And this is where it's called IBABI, the Social Housing Institute of the Balearic Islands, that published this El Croquis magazine 2 years ago, where they explain that with the political sort of push, with architects committed to this agenda, and with a territory that is extremely rich in terms of resources, you can make a difference. And for us, the first step is to acknowledge that all these resources exist. You don't need to be part of the Balearic Islands. You can be the south, east, west, or north. You just need to start by knowing and acknowledging what do you have and who is the people involved. And that's why we did that map as a first step for them to look at things differently.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
And how was actually the reaction from the architects when they got all this map?
Eh?
You spread the map throughout the country
Yeah.
to the architects, and how was the reaction?
Well, we just presented it 2 weeks ago, so
Okay.
too soon to have any metric. But nobody saw that map before. So that's quite fascinating, right? Because people in Catalonia know very well their territory. People in Balearic Islands know very well their territory. People in Galicia, like me, we know very well our territory. But it's the first time all of them are together.
Okay.
All of them are together. And actually, we could keep expanding it and applying this methodology elsewhere. That would be a fun thing to do in the next years.
Yeah, cool.
Any questions from the, yeah.
Hello. Why was wood chosen as the material for the project in Rome?
Because I wanted to do that structure well.
Okay, cool.
I did the Valencia one, and I was like, oh, it could be better, right? So let's use timber again. So we work with timber in Rome because this idea of repeating your mistakes, right? I think there is something important on learning the lessons and try to do it again in the good way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the tough questions, guys. You're very.
So thank you for your presentation. I think what really I admire is the way you have presented in the Biennale as something collective, not as a vision of someone that is not the main architect or the main star system. I think that is really valuable, and I think it's a very good example to export to the rest. No, as you said, it could be exported to another countries or to other places. So thank you. I think it's really, and in a school, I think it's a very good. So I congratulate to the committee that has selected your lecture, because I think it's really important these days to have this kind of discourses. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's true, right? In Spain, we're very fortunate to have all those people working in the same direction. So it was quite easy, the work of the curator, because this work existed there. It was about bringing it together. And I believe in that. I believe that the Biennales should be a platform where people exchange knowledge, right? And if Spain is doing something as special as this, we should communicate that to the rest of the countries. So it was a collective effort, and I'm super proud of having that opportunity. Thanks for the comment.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I was interested in the concept of externalities, because on a smaller scale, you always learn that this is a problem the market cannot fix. So on a product scale or on a smaller than a building, you always learn like it's not for the producer, but
for the market to solve or for the government to solve. How do you see your vision of those 5 points, maybe on a smaller scale than buildings? Do you also see it implemented there?
Yeah. Well, my role against those 5 type of externalities, right? So I try to address it from the perspective of a practitioner, right? When you are commissioned to do something, like I start to address that questions to the extent we can, right? So I try to look at how can we reverse all these externalities conditions, right? And this is something that everyone can do in their own practice, with their own commissions, even in a competitions. You can sort of detect or present your material palette from the very beginning, right? Your site plan, the one that you present in a competition, is not the one of the urban fabric. Actually, it starts at the territorial scale, understanding what do you have. But I have another role, which is as a researcher, as an educator. So I feel like as a researcher, the first thing we should do is to create knowledge about that, right? To present work, to visibilize good practices, to sort of dive deep into what can we do, right? And I love to do that. I have done that in the exhibition. I try to do that in university. And I think as important is to practice as trying to document things, try to make things legible and clear to the people, to the audience. Because sometimes in architecture, we made those mistakes, right? We create interesting things, and we fail in communicating it with the general public. So part of my duties is that one. How can we solve that gap between a general public that is interested in those things and all these incredible people that are creating incredible things as well, right? So I think my commitment is twofold. As a practitioner and researcher.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks. I was wondering, because you're still quite young, as you said, and already finished some ambitious projects, how did you start? Did you just start doing tenders, or was there already a group where you joined? Because it's quite a big project, also finding the builders and stuff. So how did you do it?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm quite young. And I started with friends, to be honest, like those pictures of the workshop. Do you remember the ones where we are working? I started with some friends, just producing stuff with our own hands. We applied to many competitions with very limited resources to create something. So that's why we started by doing things with our own hands, you know, very rudimental in a way, because the point is to make something real, right? And this is something I've been trying to pursue as a student. Every time there is an opportunity, a workshop, a competition, try to make it real. That's the first lesson. And the second one is, I don't know in this country, but in Spain, we have an incredible network of public competitions. So every single young architect can apply to that, right? We have these festivals that allow you for the opportunity to build something real for the first time. You have the European competitions. Well, this is European. But there are many. So we're very lucky, because if you work hard, if you put your effort there, you can get one of those. And after getting one, the second comes, and then the third, and then the fourth. So all my work is based on competitions, public competitions. And I encourage you to do that. I mean, if you're very passionate about that, try to make it real, try to present your applications to open calls, try to be radical, try to be experimental, because this is the way you can get it. And put your passion and your obsessions there on the table. And don't say no to nothing. Try to say yes to every single opportunity. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was particularly interesting, the part about the cycle of the building and the material research. My question is, personally, what makes you think your projects, the negative externalities of a project outweighs, like the project's values outweighs the externalities, like the negative externalities.
How it address the externalities part, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so far I've been working with timber.
Okay.
Timber, probably you know a lot of things about this material, but it's something that you can harvest very locally. So in every single project we harvest it very locally, not extracted it, harvested it. And when you use wood, did you know that 50% of the weight of that wood is CO2? So it is. So by using more and more timber, you're sort of helping to clean the atmosphere or remove that carbon because it's stored for a long term in that component, which is a timber panel, right? A mass timber panel. And I use that because it also connects with a landscape that I deeply care of, which is the forest. And I talked to you about the common lands in Galicia, and I actually help to coordinate and manage one of them. So every time I can, I try to work with that forest or that timber that comes from the forest that we as a community manage in the rural part of Galicia. So for me, it's about, again, joining those intelligences, those landscapes with those materials that can provide benefits to the environment. And so far, I've been working with timber. Now that I researched about the stone and clay, and I see those tests there, I really want to, expand the material palette. But so far, this is what I've been doing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well then, last question. Do you see yourself doing houses and bigger projects and only pavilions and that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. Why not? I mean, to be honest, I work in a very unpredictable way, right? As I told you before, I try to say yes to every single opportunity, and this is what came on my way in the last years. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next year, right? I don't have any specific and solid agenda. I just try to take projects that seem interesting to me and opportunities to do something I have not done before, right? Curation is the first time I do it, for example. I enjoyed it. Experimental structures with timber, I love it. And why not? I would love to upscale that, maybe social housing, maybe bigger buildings. I didn't have the chance yet. Hope in the future I will have that. But yeah, absolutely, it's on the target list.
Okay, thank you for the lecture.
Thank you so much.
Right. I want to thank Manuel Bouzas once again. So give him an applause.
Thank you, guys.
And then we'll head over to a next chapter in INDESEM, which will be the first time we will mobilize you to team up and join us for